It's been 2 weeks since President Joe Biden announced he's dropping out of the race without saying why. And the mainstream media have been campaigning hard to make Kamala Harris look like the it girl who can save America. Yet, up until about 5 minutes ago, Kamala Harris had not answered one question from journalists. And she still hasn't given an interview where, God forbid, she'd have to answer some tough questions and front up to scrutiny. But why would Kamala Harris do this when she's got outlets like CNN featuring her in CNN style? How's this headline? Look of the week. Megan Thee Stallion and Kamala Harris serve the power pantsuit 2 ways. Oh, and what does the article actually say? 2 suits, 2 women, 1 message. Hotties for Harris. How embarrassing. Look, I don't really have an issue with that campaign. What I have an issue with is the fact that Kamala Harris wants to be president of the United States, is straight up doing a Joe Biden right now, refusing to give interviews so she doesn't trip up because she is bound to, and is instead sitting back, relaxing, and letting the mainstream media do all the work for her, where they churn out glowing articles. How's this from Australia's own ABC? A remarkable new dynamic has emerged in the US election. Kamala Harris can win. Why? Because she's not Joe Biden? Because he's so old and incoherent, essentially anyone is better than him? Has everyone forgotten this is the woman who was part of the Joe Biden cover-up and who has been straight up lying to the American people for years about Joe Biden's cognitive decline? Now, as a woman who would love to see a female president one day, I know we can do better than this. But here is the Vice President earlier today reading a brief statement directly from her binder while taking no questions.
Thank you all.
Madam Vice President, will you be meeting Evan and Paul when they return?
Where is the leadership? Meanwhile, JD Vance has actually been out on the ground at the southern border, which is in crisis thanks to Kamala Harris, answering tough questions.
The former president's comments yesterday to the National Association of Black Journalists, where he said that Vice President Harris is, quote, all of a sudden black. As a father of 3 biracial children, did those comments give you pause at all?
They don't give me pause at all. Look, all he said is that Kamala Harris is a chameleon. She goes to Georgia 2 days ago. She was raised in Canada. She puts on a fake Southern accent. She is everything to everybody, and she pretends to be somebody different depending on which audience she's in front of. I think it's totally reasonable for the president to call that out, and that's all he did. I mean, look, she's running as a tough-on-crime prosecutor, even though she implemented open border policies. She's saying that she wants to support the police, yet she wanted to defund the police just 3 years ago. It's totally reasonable to call out the fact that she pretends to be somebody different depending on the audience she's talking to.
And former US President Donald Trump has also been fronting up, taking hard questions from journalists. And say what you want about Donald Trump, you know that what you see is what you get. He is a leader who will tell you exactly how he sees it.
A long time indirectly, not directly very much. And she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
She is always identified as a black woman. She went to a historically black college.
I respect either one, but she obviously doesn't, because she was Indian all the way, and then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person.
Just to be clear.
Now, I understand why people may hear those comments and everyone screams, you can't say that. But Kamala Harris has made race and gender the biggest part of her election campaign. It's her strongest selling point that she would become the first black woman in US history to become president of the United States. So we've been hearing this from her non-stop. But back in 2019, this was the messaging from Kamala Harris.
Okay, so what we're going to cook today is an Indian recipe.
Yes.
Because you are Indian.
Yes.
Okay, and I don't know that everybody knows that, but I find that wherever I go and I see Indian people at the supermarket, on the street, everyone's like, you know, Kamala Harris is Indian, right? It's like the thing we're so excited about to have you running for president.
Yeah.
So we're both Indian, but actually we're both South Indian.
Yes. You look like the entire one half of my family.
Okay, thank you.
You do.
I've been telling people we're related already, so this is perfect. It's basically true. And so were you raised eating South Indian food?
South Indian food.
Brad, look, I think the comments from Donald Trump are not going to help him, but I do think that he reserves the right to criticise her campaign strategy, and she has made race part of her campaign strategy.
Yeah, she certainly has. And I think there's some context to this conversation that's important. I watched the entire event that Trump did with these black journalists. And from the very get go, it was incredibly hostile. They came at him really strong. I do give him some credit for honestly going there because he was very much going into the lion's den. And then the question he was asked that actually prompted this unfortunate response was one of, is Kamala Harris a DEI candidate? And some Republicans are saying that. And he actually declined to go along with that idea, even though I actually think that'd be a more defensible position because Biden basically said she was a DEI candidate and said he was only considering women for his vice presidency and strongly favoring women of color. So they have made identity a huge emphasis. They're absolutely drunk on identity politics, the modern Democratic Party. But I do think that Trump, this was an unforced error because Kamala Harris can be biracial. She can be both Indian, half of her family is of Southeast Indian descent, and half of it's of Jamaican descent, which is considered black. So she can be both. It may be true that she's emphasized the Indian side of her identity more, but Trump almost seems to be suggesting that she's like an Elizabeth Warren or like somebody who's pretended to be an ethnicity she's not. That's not the case. And now everybody's talking about that rather than the other parts of this event where I thought Trump actually acquitted himself very well in an incredibly hostile environment.
Yeah, we'll just keep getting those sound bites from Donald Trump on repeat for the next few days, and then some probably dangerous commentary from some media outlets. But let's look at Kamala Harris's priorities, because we touched on JD Vance's priorities, and that is to make it easier for families to raise the next generation of children in America. But Kamala Harris, well, she wants to make sure that prisoners have taxpayer-funded trans surgeries.
And there was a specific case. And when I learned about the case, I worked behind the scenes to not only make sure that that transgender woman got the services she was deserving. So it wasn't only about that case. I made sure that they changed the policy in the state of California so that every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access to the medical care that they desired and need.
For prisoners, Brad, top priority?
No, I mean, this is not a good way to be using taxpayer dollars. It's really quite something to be pushing that. I mean, look, I believe America's a free country. Adults should do whatever they want. But ultimately, if you want those kinds of surgeries, you should pay for it yourself. You shouldn't force it onto taxpayers, especially not if you're literally behind bars because you've committed transgressions against society. The idea that they should be entitled to the full suite of gender transition surgeries and all that stuff, which is quite expensive, is pretty ludicrous. It's pretty far left, progressive, bonkers town, California style liberalism. What it's not is very palatable to a general election public, which is why those remarks are being recirculated. And the other thing I'll say is that this is a weak spot for Democrats because we are literally at a point, I don't know what it's like in Australia, but we're literally at a point in America where they are housing biologically male inmates in women's prisons, including in cases where some of those individuals are being imprisoned for violent acts or even sex-related crimes. That's insane. I understand that maybe you need to have a separate ward or accommodations for inmates who identify as transgender, but putting violent, biologically male criminals in women's prisons is a recipe for disaster, and it's something that 9 out of 10 Americans think is absolutely nuts, I'm sure, if you ever polled such a question. Yet that's the record that places like California and the policies embraced by the progressive flank of the Democratic Party have to run on these issues. So I think that's an enormous liability for them because it just strikes anybody with a bit of common sense as absolute madness.
Absolutely. And it's not pro-women.